Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Ontario Liberal MP Gerard Kennedy grew up in the Pas, Manitoba. His dad was the mayor there, and that was an early exposure to politics. But it wasn't until years of working with the Edmonton and then the Toronto Food Banks that Kennedy decided to take a try at politics himself. He joins me now to talk all about life beyond politics. Gerard Kennedy, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's really great to have you here.
It's very great to be here.
Now, you had a little bit of a political background growing up as a kid because your dad was actually a mayor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was the mayor's kid for a few years.
What was that like?
You know, in a small town, it comes with a little bit of a price, but it was fine. I was, was a little too young to be proud of it, but I saw my dad was really engaged. The town got a new pool. There was a new city hall.
This was in the Pas, too,
in the northern community of the Pas, and so it was a really vigorous, time for the town and expansion and so on. And so, I mean, at 11 years old, I wasn't really counting all that, but it seemed like a lot of neat things were going on. And there's some dividends for us. There was a new rink and there was a pool, and so it seemed like my dad was up to useful things. And so if a few kids
important things in
exactly.
life.
So if a few kids were going to bother you about it, it seemed worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's where you got your first exposure to a political life, or is your?
It's a good question. I mean, I think community service was more what I got exposed to. Mm-hmm. My father was the president of minor hockey. He was school board chair. My mother was really involved in the community as well through the church and through other things, and it just that was more the growing up exposure. I mean, if you're in a small town, there can be no pretension, so it's not about politics being something extra special or whatever have you. And my dad, we had 6 kids, so he
Oh my gosh, were you really one of 6?
Yes, so he served 6 within a very tight age frame. So he served one term as mayor and then decided not to run again. Because that was the kind of was a very hurly-burly household. So,
do you think that your father decided to run for mayor just so that he could build a rink and a pool so that he could get you guys out of the house?
He was very implicated with us. Like, he would take us to play hockey. He built us a rink at the side of our house so we could skate around the time we could walk. The town water truck would come by, and in the Pas, you don't need a lot more than just put the water out there. And so every year we had that, and so he was very involved in that way. And then my mother was all over everything else in terms of making sure we were raised properly. And I grew up with a little bit of a disability. My mother made me feel like I was the most special person in the class. So I mean, that was I felt very fortunate for the way I grew up, even though at the time it just seemed like I had 5 other people to compete with.
What was your disability?
I had a club foot when I was a kid, and I didn't know it. My mother said that the special shoes would be wanted by every other kid in the class, and so I went to grade 1, and by the end of the week, every other kid was asking their parents for those shoes.
Honestly?
And I went from hiding them to clomping them louder on the wood. So, and I developed, I never thought about not being able to run around, because my mother used to sort of think I had a talent for drawing, and I would do that kind of thing, and I'd be perfectly happy. So it was interesting. I never really realized until quite a bit later that it was just her helping me adjust, but I never felt the adjustment at all.
Where did you rank in the kids?
Second.
Second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Still do, I think. I don't think we changed those rankings. But
How many sisters? How many brothers?
3 boys, 3 girls, as they say.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you count, was it 3 boys and then 3 girls?
Mm-hmm.
Was it really? Oh
yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah, our families kind of worked that way. And,
right.
And the subsequent generation has been 3 girls and then 3 boys, if they ever get in that direction. So.
I think your parents must be thrilled to hear you say that you were lucky to grow up the way that you did, because for every parent, that's all you want for your child, just to have a happy childhood and feel loved and respected.
Yeah, and obviously you know that more as a parent. I mean, you don't, no matter how abstract you think you might, you don't really appreciate it until you look at the effort it might take, or the consideration it takes, and then you realize just the monumental stuff. I mean, I've got 2 children. To do that for 6 and have a household and they're all doing successful things and so on is not an accident. It's an action of carrying and so on. So my mom passed away last fall, so I got a chance to reflect on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I bet you did. Tell me about life as a kid. What kind of a kid were you? You said you had a talent for drawing, and
Yeah, I don't know. My mother used to tell a story and then later deny that I was the one kid she could just sort of give a rock to, and I'd examine it on the couch, and we didn't make as big a fuss in that hurly-burly household. And if I got, if I made a noise or started crying or something, give me a new rock or new something to look at. I was easy to satisfy. I guess the upshot of that.
Okay.
So I don't know. I kind of I think I must have been a bit of an imaginative kid, because I just remember a very happy childhood. I was intrigued by a lot of different things, and I did well at school and so on. And life was kind of an adventure. And we lived in a northern community. We'd go play in the bush, and we seemed to have endless freedom. I mean, we didn't let our daughter go to the corner store, but we would run all over the town, and we had the lake and so on, so very outdoors oriented. And it was, I mean, it's not idyllic in the sense, but it was enjoyable. It was fun childhood.
you played hockey.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and you took that right up into school.
I eventually did. I mentioned I had a problem, but there was a local guy who saw how I struggled to skate, and he made a special brace.
Oh, wow.
For my skate. He just went to the welding shop and came up with it.
Wow, is that ever neat?
Yeah, and I didn't, again, it's one of those things. He and my dad worked it out, and until I was 11, and I kind of worked out of the problem of standing properly and so on. It helped me participate. And then I did play junior and some university hockey and so on. So.
Yeah. Now, you went to university further west.
Yeah, I originally went to Trent University in Peterborough.
Oh, right.
And University of Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I was really interested to hear that, in fact, you didn't finish your degree at University of Alberta because you were asked to head up the food bank, the Edmonton Food Bank. Is that how it worked?
Kind of like that. I mean, I have to say I was in some, not struggle, I argued a lot with my professors and so on, and so I was actually...
That is so interesting, given what kind of a child you were. An easygoing kid, and then...
Yeah, no, but I don't know. I think... I won't try and justify, but I was always arguing, always looking to change the way that things were working, not a good conformist at all, and I was looking for things outside of university. So the food bank thing wasn't just they asked me to do that. I'd already been involved in it as a volunteer. I tried to get a lot of other students involved. I was president of one of the colleges at U of A, and we got people involved from there. I think we even got the wrestling team in at one time.
Oh,
and
wow.
so on. And I just somehow I leaned there as not more valid at all. I wouldn't say that to my daughter or my son or whatever, but it just seemed that that's what I was more disposed to do. And then yes, I took it on. What was supposed to be, I think, 3 months or 6 months to be the coordinator. I mean, you're 22 years old. They're not asking you to run anything. They ask you to fill a certain kind of role. But I was very lucky to get the chance to do that. And then I had people mentoring me. I was in this position of translating between the business people, the charitable people, the social justice people, and I seemed to be the one ready to listen and get them all in the room and get something done. But that's
tough work, because these are people who are coming from totally different perspectives,
yeah.
all with the same goal in mind,
yeah.
but totally different perspectives.
Right, but that was the one, I guess, justification for a 22-year-old to be in charge of anything.
Okay.
So, yeah.
How did your family react when you left school and went on to coordinate?
I think differently. I mean, for my father, who grew up in a northern town and had to leave his own university education to look after his family and stuff, that was, that was just. I've got siblings who have literally, I wouldn't want to misrepresent them, 3 or 4, maybe even more degrees. I mean, in education, my mother was a teacher, was really, really instilled in us, and the joy of learning I got early, and maybe I got overbid on it in the sense that it really had to mean something to me. And so that was an really enormous part of our household, and we were, always in argument. I mean, the dinner table to some extent, and then elsewhere. Pole economy was a contact sport in our family, but it was all about, I guess, kind of being curious and wanting to know about stuff. And
so, did you basically feel when you were at U of A that you were just not challenged? It was not just as grippingly interesting as you expected life in university.
Again, I don't want to reach back with a justification. I think I made lots of mistakes in terms of, but part of it was just wanting to be really challenged and bristling against timelines and things like that, and then having disagreements with certain professors and things, and I just saw that as part of the exercise. The system doesn't necessarily allow for that, but I could have, I'm sure, done a better job of fitting in.
Yeah,
so,
but that wouldn't have been you then.
Perhaps, but I have a lot of regard for that part of discipline, which I was able to pick up. I mean, you've got to make things work, and there has to be a, like an organizational spine to anything you do, or you can't make that happen. But I probably hit that lesson a little bit later.
Maybe you were in the wrong field. Maybe, given your interest in rocks, you should have been in archaeology or something.
Yeah, well, I took Canadian studies eventually and loved it. Canadian intellectual history, there is such a thing, and the things that people had done and the whole idea of a country was very, very intriguing to me. And from the north, you feel a bit isolated. You feel like you're out of the swim of things, and so you're caused to try and understand, okay, what does it take for everybody to be a part of this? And so no, I liked the studies that I was doing. Maybe I liked them a little bit too much and didn't understand the game part of it. So anyway, that was part of my formation. But whatever reason, I just sprung into doing things. I found that I was really good at making things, getting things done. And so the food bank thing kind of came together in part because I was looking for an expression for that, but also because I was smart enough to listen to the people around me. I had this particular business fellow who took time to come in every day and tell me what I was doing wrong for about a year.
Wow.
And every single day, unpacked his briefcase and would rewrite my reports and do that kind of thing. And
that's commitment.
Enormous commitment. And so I was the fortunate recipient of that. And then there was a group of people, and I don't know, that's a kind of a Canadian thing that, in a sense of, I look around and I see that's how school boards got built. That's how other organizations got done, as people just self-sacrificed in a quiet way. And I was really fortunate to be there at the gestation of something, the first food bank, the first organization trying to make that happen. And it had a really strong, profound effect on me to understand how to get people to work together, and then to learn from others in the course of doing that.
And you evidently did a very good job of it, because you ended up in Toronto. I mean, were you...
Well, that would be the wrong proposition for somebody from Edmonton at that time. In other words, we finally decided, I turned it down 4 times, and then the group that I worked with in Edmonton, the first food bank, decided we would bring some of that Western know-how. I was a Westerner on loan for quite a while, and I think my credentials are pretty wore out now, but that was not seen as, in fact, I bristled against the idea that the pinnacle of things would be to come to Toronto.
No, and I definitely don't mean it as being the pinnacle of things, but the size of the Toronto Food Bank is substantially larger.
It wasn't at the time. The food banks were a new idea. They had Edmonton, they'd actually been rejected in Canada as unnecessary, but the recession that hit in the 80s, and in the case of Edmonton, it was the boom times, had created a need that was out of the reach of churches and community organizations. And so finally it landed, first in Edmonton, and then there were different variants in Vancouver and Regina about a year later. And Toronto had started later than that. And I think they were trying to figure out how to do it at the point when they brought me in. So it was a little different than they were big and needed someone to manage. They wanted to see some of the ideas we developed. And the Canadian idea of a food bank is, don't just give the food to people, but work your way out of business. Find a solution to this thing. Dignity comes when people can supply themselves and their families. And so that was very entrenched in I would like to say the Canadian idea, but at least the Edmonton model, and that's what the people in Toronto wanted me to try and do.
So you very reluctantly went to Toronto.
I think I can sincerely say that. I mean, my brother was there as a corporate lawyer, and I had a sister that was out there. But I mean, when you're raised in the West, going east is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. I'll just say that,
Sure.
So, yeah.
And at what stage did you say, yeah, I'm happy that I made this decision?
I mean, I never thought of it as a career itself, and so I didn't think of it as a career move. I thought of it as, is this worth doing? Is it worth trying to help the folks in Toronto? Can I leave behind what we've done in Edmonton? There's still an abiding need. But we had not only built a food bank that was the largest in the country and convinced the corporations to give up their surplus food, had a successful food drives and got literally thousands of people to fill bags of food for the first time. But we had also caused the government to reverse their welfare cuts. And we had engaged a whole bunch of churches and community places and so on to work together to agree that people didn't just need their charity in terms of their sympathetic intentions. They also needed them to stand up for what kind of life they lived the other 30 days of the month or whatever it was that the gap was there. And we thought that was kind of significant. And so that was the idea. Was that worthwhile? It seemed to be. I had no idea what the challenge would be like in Toronto. I did one scouting visit and then decided I would do it. I mean, I was still only 26, and I thought, okay, well, I'll sign up for a year, something like that.
And then you stayed 10?
That's right.
10. And you haven't really left. I mean,
well,
let's be honest. I mean, you're still there.
Yeah, no, and look, I mean, I learned to really love Toronto and a lot of the aspects of Toronto.
Yeah.
And you know, what you get if you do a job like the one I had is a privilege to see. You see people with pride and dignity when there's no explanation for it, when they're kind of stripped down to that. And then you see people who are prepared to care about others, and they never meet them. And they come in and they start working, and it's like they just unleash that part of themselves. And people would come in to sort food for 2 hours, and they do it for 8. There were people that, you know, I had a guy walk in one time, and I tracked it down a bit, but didn't want to invade his privacy, but with a personal check for $100,000 that I think represented a big part of his savings. And it's the look on his face is, you know, don't identify me, don't celebrate me, just, you know, let this stuff happen. And so it was actually quite a privilege, you know, to just get out of the way, let people kind of express themselves, reinforce people's sense of dignity on the receiving end, try and engage them so that they felt this wasn't just happening to them. And because you felt compelled to do that. You could not just give somebody food, see that look in their eyes, and let them walk away feeling worse. And then on the other end, there were people really prepared to, you know, they didn't know that person, they didn't know their family, they didn't know how their kids were, but they somehow could walk in their shoes, and they just wanted them to be better off. And they didn't pretend that giving them food was solving their life's problem. So, I mean, to me, that was a very strong daily motivation, and somehow I had a role there. I was a little bit of a catalyst to try and bring that together, and you know, it's an important part of human nature I think I got exposed to there.
How much of that exposure to human nature, to that exposure really to humanity at its best and at its worst in terms of a need, influenced your decision to go into politics versus an issue versus wanting to change the system?
Well, I think they were very intertwined. I mean, I think I had a resistance to politics. Once you do something, you get a little bit of notoriety. People invite you to take part in politics, and you know, I was kind of a closet liberal in Alberta, which
it must have been very popular.
Well, you know, it was actually kind of neat to be a liberal. It was sort of like that was a bit of a radical thing to be doing, both a little bit on campus and then elsewhere. But the food bank was a civic thing, and you saw that the capacity to get people to work together. My father had been both mayor, and I'd seen a little bit of the downside of that too, the phone calls late at night and so on, and some of the disagreement. But he ran in 1984 as a federal candidate. It wasn't a great year for Liberals, the West or elsewhere. But you know, I had a regard and a respect for politics. I also had an uncle in Edmonton who was both a priest and an alderman, and was a real example of getting things done and doing it with integrity. So it really took the Harris government to get me into politics, though, to show me that, look, they're cutting welfare, for example, 22%, taking the food off people's plates. It was like somebody threw an enormous boulder in a pond, and there were no ripples whatsoever. There was no general uprising of people, you know, saying that this isn't right, there's something immoral. If we're going to cut, for sure, let's do that. But why would we take the last scraps off a family's table? Why would we take away their dignity? Why would we make them fall further down when they're trying to pick themselves up? And realizing that the societal reaction was really one of acceptance, that, oh yeah, there must be somebody, you know, if somebody out there doesn't deserve it, well, let's punish everybody. Wasn't probably the literal thought people had, but it just told me that the political system needed changing, needed some kind of engagement, and also I had no choice. I mean, the food bank was almost irrelevant in the face of that kind of stuff. And so I finally decided to become part of trying to do something from there. It was like, they tell the parable about the babies floating down the river, and at some point you got to figure out where they're coming from, rather than just looking after them or building an orphanage.
Were you married at this point?
No, not so emphatically not married. I think I had a very understanding future wife, but I had sort of decided that I was going to try and accomplish something. The political...
You mean politically?
Well, first, did not see a big difference between getting something done.
And I don't mean political and kind of like,
yeah, but which is perfectly fine. But I did see getting into politics as a continuity with, I guess, a bit of a mission to see people better treated, to see them understood, and to see society stop having this artificial thing about what happens if you become disabled or you lose a job or your family breaks up. You should pay a huge penalty on top of those things. Instead, I think there need to be some understanding, whatever. And I was very driven by the people I met. I delivered food to people. I saw them in their homes. I saw people in the lineups and so on. So that seemed a useful thing to do, and that's what I guess I imagined I was going to get that done and then get on with the rest of my life. Didn't quite work out that way, but that,
you know what? That's your journey.
But that was the proposition, I guess, for myself and the relationship that I was in, and that I would have to wait a bit.
Did she understand? Did she get where you were coming from?
Yeah, without doubt, without reservation. Okay. Which doesn't necessarily make it easy at all, but yeah, that was a quality that she had. Yeah.
So when did you get married? I
got married. I was still at the food bank, actually. Okay. So I didn't answer the question properly. It was still at the food bank.
Yeah.
1991.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you proposed this running, this was provincially at
That's
first.
Right. Yeah.
Was the general reaction, great, let's go for it, or was the general reaction like, oh my God?
Well, I hate to say, but the sales point was that it would be more structured and couldn't be more hours than the food bank.
So we all need a sales point.
So that's how it really did.
Yeah.
Sort of, it was seen as a transition, something to get me out of these endless 90-hour weeks and so on. And I think I'm the wrong person sitting here to verify, but I think it actually did have that effect. I think there was a point where you can throw yourself into something sort of without reservation, and there's a limit to that. And so food banks kind of pulled me back. The politics pulled me back a bit from the food bank experience, and I got to channel things probably a little more constructively, but in that political sense, which is quite a bit different than charity.
And tell me why you made the decision, it seems to me that you are making these career decisions based on, well, I'll give it a try. And so you gave the food bank a try in Edmonton, and then you gave Toronto a try, and then
never thought of it as a career decision. I thought of it as is this worth doing? In other words, what am I trying to get done? And I want to feed people, or not. I didn't really want to feed people. I wanted to see people be able to feed themselves, and we seem to have a vehicle to help both take care of that in the short term and get people to care about it in the medium term. And so that felt worthwhile. As long as we're building that and more of that was happening, and in the political thing, could we change people's mind? This I call it the comic book revolution, the common sense revolution. It was 22 pages with pictures that said you can do more with less. You can kind of be against some people in society and so on. And opposing that and coming up with a better, I thought, more Canadian version of that was worth trying. That was worth trying. The career thing, I kind of jumped off. I ran in a by-election in a riding that had never been held by the Liberals in 50 years. I followed Mr. Ray's steps there in the sense that he gave it up and for the NDP. The people who wanted me to be in politics actually wanted me to run for the leader of the party, but don't run the by-election. And my basic reaction was, well, if I can't get elected, I can't be much of a leadership candidate. So we did that, and we won the by-election. But I saw that as a way to make that difference. Just that particular time, the Ontario Liberal Party, which thought it was going to win the previous election, maybe needed somebody a little unusual, and that's where I showed up.
Is that sense of needing someone a little unusual why you decided to give up provincial politics and run federally?
It's similar, yeah. Although it tempered by this, that you can actually get a tremendous amount done. The 3 years I spent as Minister of Education in Ontario showed me there are no excuses. Like, you can actually line people up, drive a consensus, and make people better off. And everything else is window dressing. And so we got test scores up by 8 points. We got the dropout rate down. I think, after I left, it was down about 8 or 9 points. We got 4-year contracts where there had been 27 million lost school days to strikes and lockouts. There weren't any when I was the Minister of Education. And we got a focus in the system, which I thought was inherently there. Teachers were allowed to teach, and things started to move, and innovation started to come out. And There was no. It was a turnaround of a certain kind, and there are lots of other things as well that just told me if you apply yourself in a certain kind of way, that government and politics can deliver for people. And so that's what I thought I was bringing, if you like, to the federal level is that sense of we got to get people interested in how things get done and what actually happens, as opposed to the words and the promises and whatever have you. And so that's somehow in there became the intent to go federal. Although I'm not trying to make a pattern of it, but I said no quite a few times before I finally got talked into that.
What kind of a dad are you?
I am a very lucky dad. I have got a couple of great kids, very challenging in their own way, and inquisitive and curious and so on. And I love being around my kids.
But you're not around in the traditional sense of 9-to-5 job, being home at night for supper. How did they react to that, and how do you react to that?
That is without a doubt the hardest part of anything that I do. But I mean, it's, I stood for election, and I'm sure there are other people out there who've got to travel, and they've got to, they got to do things that keep them at work and so on. So it's of that nature, and for all of us, there's a strain. It's hard to leave, and when your young son comes running down the hallway from 40 feet away and jumps on you and hangs on to you, you get a sense that there's something that you always got to be doing something worthwhile to make that sense of separation to justify it. And so that's the high standard. And as long as I'm meeting that, or think I'm on the road to meeting that, then I'm okay, because it has to line up. And I wouldn't want to do it if I felt otherwise.
Do you like Ottawa? Not the city, but the political Ottawa?
I appreciate Ottawa. I am not a fan of how it doesn't work today. I call it a fixer-upper, and I don't mean that the least bit disdainful. I just think we're capable of more than is going on in Ottawa. And I don't, look back to some rosy version of what a minority government is capable of or whatever, but I just think the country has needs. I think that the federal government itself lost a lot of cachet when it lost its fiscal capacity, and people stopped having expectations. But I think that means the country is paralyzed. I mean, I learned at the provincial level, you can do some great things, but you're the carpenters, and you can build things, and you can put that education, make that healthcare work, but the ideas have to be dealt with at the national level. You have to cross that English-French divide. You have to sort of find some things that supersede differences, and we're not doing that in the least in Ottawa today, and that would be my complaint. But the possibilities are there, and I think there's a lot of interest. I think I talk to young people, I talk to people who have been involved in politics, and it just drives me to try and create an opening for them, because more people in politics is the solution to the problems that I see in Ottawa.
I appreciate you taking the time to be here today. It was pleasant, very pleasant to chat with you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.